Supreme Grandmaster Azrael fought his way forward through a screaming press of heretics. The sky above was a churning storm of burning petrochemical clouds and blistering dogfights. Gunfire, clashing blades, and bellowed oaths blended into a deafening cacophony. Azrael's armor was drenched in gore, as was the bone-white plate of the Terminators and Blade Guard who fought at his side. Corpses crunched and squelched under their every advancing footfall. Guns thundering, fists and blades swinging, the Deathwing hurled back the cultist mobs and butchered them to the last man and woman. Azrael led his warriors up a wide metal ramp, riveted together with bone. Pistons strung with pumping muscle formed a wall to one side, while to the other the ramp dropped away towards a valley of iron and crumbling stone, where loyalists and heretics battled furiously amidst ever-churning machines. Azrael's instinct was to turn and aid his battle brothers, but with Vox and Ospec useless, he had to reach high ground, and he had to regain the clarity of the wider strategic situation. Striding over a carpet of the broken dead, Azrael crested the ramp and marched out onto the wide open platform. He ignored the blood-wet clots of machinery that jutted onto the platform's surface, and the yellow eyes set into their dripping flanks that swiveled to follow his advance. Moving to the platform's edge, where a nest of rusted gantries and stairways led back down to the street level below, he stared out across the heavy turmoil of the battle. On the right flank, Samael and his Ravenwing had cut deep into the foe's lines and encircled the swath of tech mutants and Cornate renegades near the foot of a clockwork edifice. The swift Space Marines were even now culling their victims mercilessly. The left flank, by comparison, had developed into a ferocious firefight as Dark Angel's armor met stalking Chaos Knights amidst crumbling Gothic towers and thundering engines of iron and bone. Ahead, Azrael could see the red-armored figures battling one another fiercely, as the Blood Angels and the World Eaters clashed in dozens of separate conflicts, the curled spines of the Warforged Palace looming directly overhead, looking more arachnid and menacing than ever. For all of the dark grandeur of this spectacle, Azrael's attention was drawn to the ruined top of the high tower, now less than a quarter of a mile ahead, where the elite of the Blood Angels fought Angron. The fury of that fight had blown out walls and sent avalanches of masonry raining down into the streets around the tower. Angron and his enemies now battled in full view between the surreal remnants of interior walls, columns, and denuded stairways. Corpses clad in red or gold armor were scattered everywhere. Azrael wished for a moment that his vision was not so keen, for it showed in inescapable detail the catastrophic wounds that had reduced once proud warriors to so much mangled metal and meat. Some bodies even dangled from lengths of twisted rebar that jutted from the high walls. Sanguinary Guard, Space Marines, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and even Terminator plate. A Redemptor dreadnought sprawled, burned and broken, lay against the shattered column. Rich red blood coated every surface and drooled and clotted ropes down the tower's walls. Angron was himself torn and bloodied, his armor buckled, greasy smoke boiling from the flames that licked at his wings. Yet where he had butchered almost all of his attackers, their efforts to banish him had not even slowed the Red Angel. Angron fought like a bloody whirlwind, wheeling, hacking, stomping, and roaring as he sought to slaughter the last of the warriors who opposed him. Even as Azrael watched in dismay, the Demon Primarch's axe ripped through Commander Dante's personal banner-bearer and hurled the bifurcated Sanguinary Guard across the tower. Fresh blood soaked into the fallen standard where it lay. Desperate to aid the Blood Angels, appalled at the price they had paid in their attempt to aid his warriors, Azrael raised Lion's Wrath and opened fire upon Angron. The Deathwing needed no order to follow his lead. A fusillade of fire split the air between the platform and the tower top, deadly accurate despite the range. Angron roared in fury as he was peppered with rounds, some of which ripped through his corporeal form in gouts of molten gore. As the Demon Primarch whirled towards his new attackers, a golden armored figure rocketed from atop a broken stairway and swung his glowing axe at Angron. Fast as fury, the Demon Primarch spun, ignoring the Dark Angel's firestorm as he parried Commander Dante's attack. A burst of light, a shockwave exploded out as Spinegrinder met the Axe Mortalis. Angron staggered back from the exchange, however. Dante, by comparison, was smashed from the air and into the stone steps hard enough to crack them. He lay still and did not rise. Azrael cried out in dismay as Angron threw back his head and roared his triumph. The Blood Angel's chapter master lay defenseless before him, open to the killing blow. Yet as Azrael watched powerless, shadow suddenly coiled around the Red Angel and his victim. Tendrils of mist obscured the figures, and from amidst the vapors spread incongruous green shoots of what looked to Azrael like plant life. Shifting shapes unfurled, resembling nothing so much as a sketch of a dream of half-remembered trees. Their dense boughs more than shadow, more, until Azrael's bewilderment gave way to awe. A tall figure in a flowing cloak stepped from the mist to place himself between Angron and Dante. Space Marines in black armor manifested around him and spread out down the steps, but Azrael barely noticed them. He could only stare at the warrior with the glowing blade and glinting shield. It did not matter that Azrael had only seen him before in tapestries, frescoes, and stained glass. His very blood knew this warrior's identity. His gene seed sang with the truth, teetering as close to being overwhelmed as it was possible for a space marine to come. Azrael went to one knee. He was looking at the lion, returned to his gene sons at the hour of their greatest need. Some part of Azrael squirmed with dread, for the Primarch had also returned in time to witness the sins of the unforgiven writ large. His mind whirled with self-recommendatory images. The rock defiled by invasion, Luther's escape, the horrors unleashed by the Totolcha engine. Yet even these memories could not undermine the surge of raw vitality and exultation that galvanized Azrael at the sight of the lion alive and returned. The battle brothers of the Deathwing bellowed amazed oaths as word spread from one band of Dark Angels to the next. The survivors of the strike force surged into their foes with redoubled zeal. Atop the tower, even Angron had paused to glare at his former brother. Yet the spell was broken as the Red Angel howled and launched at the lion. Their mighty blades clashed again and again, sparks raining from each impact. The sword of Samniadius struck the lion's shield and rebounded in a concussive pulse of light and force. Several of the black-armored space marines who accompanied the lion lunged to take advantage of the opening in the demon Primarch's guard, and only now did Azrael register with disquiet the resemblance to warriors of the fallen. Angron swept Spinegrinder in a roaring arc, and bloodied corpses scattered away from him. Azrael saw the lion bark in order, and suddenly the black-armored warriors melted away down the tower steps towards the battle below. The lion now backed away from his foe, and Angron stormed after him. Azrael realized this was no retreat, but rather an attempt to draw Angron away from the fallen Dante. Back and forth across the tower top, the two demigods battled, Angron raining a constant storm of blows upon his foe, while the lion demonstrated sublime martial skill in fending off or evading every strike. Flames and roiling mist whirled about the two combatants, tattering apart each time another shockwave burst from the lion's shield. Azrael was then torn away from the spectacle as a hail of bolt shells whipped up from below to ricochet from the Deathwing Terminator's formidable armor. Vox-amplified howls rose, warning of a fresh band of World Eaters storming up the gantries from street level to assault Azrael's position. He realized he had been entranced by his gene sire's arrival, but that was there, and there was a battle to be fought here and now. But even as he rose and let fly into the foes climbing up from below, Azrael could not deny himself a last glance at the tower top. L. Johnson looked directly at Azrael, and their eyes locked. The sensation of his Primarch's regard hit Azrael like a physical blow. Fire seemed to race through his veins. No words could they exchange, yet, in that moment, the Supreme Grand Master knew precisely what his gene sire wished of him. L. Johnson was risking himself to draw the rampaging demon Primarch away, not only from his own scions, but from the Blood Angels also. That left Commander Dante and any other of his honor guard who might still cling to life, lying wounded amidst the ruins. There was a blood debt here, a matter of honor and duty that the Dark Angels could not ignore. Azrael had his quest from his liege lord, and he would see it completed. Whatever came after, he would deal with it, if he lived that long. The lion leapt from the tower and vanished from sight. Roaring his hate, Angron lunged in pursuit. Brandishing the sword of secrets, Azrael stepped forth to meet his own onrushing foes. "For the lion!" he bellowed. His war cry was taken up by the Deathwing and then by all the Dark Angels fighting in the Warpforged Palace. Soon, the air rang with their shouts, even over the thunder of the battle and the endless churning of the planet's infernal machines. "For the lion and the Emperor!" As he freed the head of a world eater by the neck, he was in time to see the lion backing towards the edge of the tower, trading blows with Angron, still fighting defensively as though to goad his berserk opponent. The Warforged palace itself seemed to heave with obscene life in the course of the duel. Sinewy, gore-wet flesh surged from grates and valves, strong though, with sparking wires, glowing islands, and gnashing metal fangs. Roadways cracked down their middles, then yawned open like mile-long trapdoors, tilting battling warriors and land vehicles down into furnace pits, where cogs gnashed and piston-driven crushers pulverized metal, flesh, and souls. High overhead, the arachnoid spines creaked into motion, their tips curled down and inward like the mandibles of a vast insectile maw. Gunships and flying demon engines were smashed from the air by the descending masses of steel and muscle. Shadows pooled about doomed combatants who looked up in despair before they were crushed. Through it all battled Angron and the lion. L. Johnson was disgusted by his former brother's hideous form, contemptuous of the monster Angron had made of himself. Yet, he did not underestimate the supernatural might that dark apotheosis had granted the demon Primarch. The lion fought with every lot of skill he possessed, channeling all the lessons he had ever learned about combating wild and warp-tainted beasts. For his part, Angron felt little beyond the furious pounding of the butcher's nails. He dimly recognized the lion, but L. Johnson was just another foe to be slain. An eternity of unending rage and hate had blunted the Red Angel's capacity to revile one enemy more than any other. Angron would take his once brother's head for corn, just as he had taken those of so many of the lion's gene sons already this day. The two demigods fought their way across a mechanical plateau where piston columns pounded maniacally and jets of white-hot flame erupted from hidden apertures. Angron sought to lop L. Johnson's head off from his shoulders, but felt he was there to block the blow. Samniadius rebounded again from the Emperor's shield, and as the shockwave drove Angron back, the lion seized the chance to duck around a pummeling row of pistons and gain some space. Angron dropped his head and bowled straight through the slabs of machinery. He bellowed as he wrenched aside sparkling mechanisms and hacked apart steel-braided sinew, only to recoil as the lion smashed the Emperor's shield into his face. L. Johnson retreated again, a strategy coherent in his mind as he clattered down a spiraling brass stairway. He was gaining a sense of his foe. Angron was a devastatingly powerful and unrelenting enemy, but the lion thought he knew how he might defeat his former brother. His train of thought was suddenly disrupted as the stairway gave a violent lurch. Looking up, L. Johnson saw Angron had taken to the air, letting his weapon dangle from their chain's manacles as he grasped the stairway's superstructure, then wrenched the edifice away from the side of the mechanical plateau. With an oath, the lion leapt clear as the spiral stair buckled under its own weight and collapsed. He dropped, cloak rippling behind him, and landed atop the roof of a Gothic ruin. Despite the tumorous masses of biotechnology that grew from it, L. Johnson felt a horrible sense of familiarity as he glanced around the crumbling rooftop and saw the hooded statues that dotted it. He did not know precisely what this structure had been, but he recognized the architectural style of Caliban before Imperial compliance. But the lion had no time for bitter reflection as Angron fell upon him again. Like a roaring thunderbolt spat from the skies of dancing flame, the Primarch's weapons clashed and clashed again as the lion gave ground before his enemy's brutal onslaught. Lost to the rage Angron might have been, but hardwired instinct coupled with the dark gifts of his patron god lent him to a tremendous martial skill. Unleashing a flurry of blows upon the lion, he forced open a gap in his opponent's guard before landing a kick to L. Johnson's chest that cracked the armor and threw him through a statue with punishing force. Sensing what was coming next, L. Johnson kept rolling even as Angron's axe slammed into the rooftop where he had been a split second before. Reaching the roof's edge, the lion threw himself out into thin air and dropped onto a tilted metal platform some 30 feet below. He rolled with the impact and came up in a guard stance, shooting a quick look at his surroundings as he did so. The sight that greeted him was a surreal one. This region of the Warforged palace appeared to have contorted atop vast, unseen gimbals so that what had been a flat plane of riveted metal plates had now become a treacherous landscape of steeply angled ramps. Crackling energy pylons thrust skyward from between the crooked plates. It looked as though loyalist and heretic war engines had been dueling here before the cataclysmic awakening of the planet began. Dark Angels and World Eaters battle tanks lay helpless where they had been hurled onto their roofs, or blazed where they had smashed together or had slid into contact with the lightning wreath pylons. More tanks and a handful of staggering Chaos Knights were still mobile. Some crews looked to be falling back, trying to maneuver their vehicles onto more stable ground. Others, prizing hatred or vengeance even over life, fought on as best they could, even as their war engine slid inexorably towards oblivion. Angron swooped from atop the Gothic ruin and fell upon the lion again. This time, L. Johnson was prepared. Dropping to one knee, he raised the Emperor's shield and caught the full force of Angron's meteoric descent upon it. Golden energy erupted in a tremendous shockwave, and the Red Angel was hurled back to smash down amidst the precariously battling war machines. If the lion had expected a moment's respite from this gambit, he was disappointed. Angron rose with an incensed howl and hurled the World Eater's predator toward the lion with an underhanded swing of his axe. Seeing the improbable projectile coming, L. Johnson dove aside. However, he was not quick enough to avoid the next tank, a Dark Angel's impulsor that Angron sent slamming and bouncing end over end in his direction. The vehicle hit the lion and smashed him back into the wall of the Gothic ruin hard enough to crater the stonework. Angron howled and charged, beating his wings to give himself more impetus. Bloodied and in pain, but knowing that he had moments to act, the lion heaved aside the crumpled wreck of the impulsor and leapt atop it. He spared a moment's thought for his Gene sons, slain within the ruined vehicle, and anger smoldered within him. Angron leaped to strike and the lion dove aside, leaping away from the wreck and hammering the Emperor's shield into the back of Angron's skull as he went. Propelled forward by the blow, the Red Angel smashed headlong into the ruin and was buried in an avalanche of rubble as the wall came down upon him. The lion backed away swiftly, limping slightly, dimly aware of the tanks still dueling around him even as he kept his attention on the rubble heap. He knew Angron could not be so easily defeated, but he hoped at least to have wounded his former brother. If nothing else, the ignominy of being buried alive could have stoked Angron's fury to new heights, something the lion was counting on. And it was then that the rubble heap erupted. Flaming chunks of masonry rocketed through the air, several striking tanks with the force of wrecking balls. Angron came at the lion in a red blur, eyes blazing hate, weapons swinging wildly. So sudden and ferocious was the assault that even L. Johnson could not react in time. He managed to bring up the Emperor's shield up between himself and Angron, but the angle was poor and the titanic discharge of energy threw him backwards as violently as his foe. The ground fell away beneath the lion as he stumbled and fell tumbling back into the fume-wreathed gulfs beneath the tilted platforms. Angron bellowed a war cry and plunged after him. The lion smiled mirthlessly, for here was the perfect environment for the culmination of his tragedy. He faded into the smog an instant ahead of Angron, who howled with fury to find his opponent vanished. The Red Angel was by now apoplectic. Though incapable of feeling fatigue, Angron was not accustomed to the mounting frustration of fighting one opponent for so long while they maintained a relatively defensive stance. He had claimed no skulls and shed only the merest drops of blood for what felt like an eternity. The insistent pounding of the butcher's nails suffused his being with white-hot agony. His capacity for reason had been drowned in molten fury and pain. To find his foe vanished, then, was near unbearable. Angron could scent the lion's potent biology and the lapping powders of his armor. He could hear the Primarch's heartbeats, his footfalls, the serval whine of his battle plate. He glimpsed the furnace-like beacon of L. Johnson's soul in the warp sight. Yet the phantasmic smog occluded even Angron's demonic senses. The lion, for his part, had less trouble keeping track of a foe that roared and snarled oaths and imprecations with every heaving breath. Angron hacked at half-imagined Geist and bellowed with rage. In response, the lion surged suddenly from the flank and struck with the Emperor's shield, sending Angron roiling and recoiling into the air with wings beating. The demon Primarch lunged, but L. Johnson was gone again into the fumes. Angron thundered after his prey. Again the lion evaded, struck and faded back from his enemy's lightning-fast counterattack. In his mind, he fought monsters again in mist-wreathed Calibanite forests. The few times Angron landed a blow, the Emperor's shield was always there to block it and send the demon Primarch reeling back. All the while Angron's rage mounted until it danced across his body as spectral flame. His muscles and eyes bulged as though he might literally burst from the anger swelling within. Then came a piston, rushing up from the depths and discharging steam as it slammed to a halt at its apogee. For a moment it blasted aside the veil of smoke. The lion was revealed in the act of slipping around the Angron's flank for yet another goading strike. There was no thought, only the primal urge to kill, as Angron beat his wings and hurled himself at the lion like a living avalanche. He swung his weapons in wide arcs as he came, aiming to scissor them through L. Johnson's neck in a move no shield could possibly balk. Yet this time, the lion made no effort to defend. With blistering speed, he instead dropped to one knee, braced his blade with his whole body, and let Angron slam straight into its raised point. The demon Primarch's own impetus drove the glowing blade up through his torso, until it erupted from the nape of his neck in a fountain of gore. Borne on by forces of Angron's charge, the two demigods rolled and bounced through the fumes. Angron came to rest on his back, one wing pinned under him in his corporeal form, unable to reknit his calamitous wound with Felty still transfixing it. The red angel thrashed and howled. One clawed hand dug into his wounded sternum in search of the blade's ichor-slick grip. The lion loomed over Angron, armor bloodied and dented. He gripped the Emperor's shield with both hands and gave Angron no time to react. With a roar, Lionel Johnson brought the glowing edge of his shield down upon the demon Primarch's head, driving it through the bridge of Angron's nose with such force that it embedded itself in the metal surface beneath. Angron's corporeal form detonated like a tank round whose propellant was distilled. Hate, blasting his animus apart with such tremendous force of released rage that even the demon Primarch's indomitable will could not draw it back together. L. Johnson was thrown clear of the blast and came back upon his cloak, smoldering and his cracked arms still scorched. Breathing hard, his body racked with the pain of countless wounds sustained while battling Angron, he limped back to the blood-streaked crater in which Felty lay. As he recovered his blade, the lion felt certain that he would see his former brother again, likely sooner than he might hope. For now, though, Angron was banished. The lion sighed and shook his head. He turned his armor's vox bead to the Dark Angel's command channel and listened intently. Hefting blade and shield, the Primarch set off south, towards the nearest extraction site. He limped along. He considered his deeds this day, his choice of his gene sons over the wider galaxy. He had so much to tell them, so much to do. It was time to rejoin his unforgiven sons and to begin the work of ensuring his sacrifices had not been in vain.